Right, hello again. So now in this video we're going to take a look at starting to do our composite of our final image here. So what we've got is a fairly disorganized Nuke node graph at this stage. So just to explain what we've got here, so there's a couple other bits I'm going to probably need to bring in. Just do that now while I remember. So let's just find these. Let's grab this one. This is going to take a little bit of time to get that. Okay, that's probably all I need there. Yeah. So we've got a beauty pass. This is an animated shot here. So this is on frame 1294 right now. This little car, it's kind of moving around. So it starts, in the background. It kind of runs along and kind of eventually sort of ends up here. So again, this is courtesy of one of our guys at Brunel here, Tarrant. So this is his shot here. So just for a bit of variety, not always looking at my example. So we've got the car here. This is actually the beauty pass. Now this was rendered out as a non-multi-channel EXR. So this was rendered out with render elements. This is the beauty pass. But we do have a bunch of others kind of coming out here. So we have a diffuse, we have a reflect, we have a reflect there, sorry, we have a refract. So there's our reflections, highly reflective surfaces, our refraction. So here we can see, if we look closely, there's the kind of glass in the headlights, but in the windows and stuff like that. So that's all great. A diffuse space color. We have our specular, which basically our tyres. There's quite a specular highlight going on there. We have a Z depth of the whole scene, so that's in there, nice as well. We also have a velocity pass, which we could use for some motion blur. We have the original backplate. Now the original backplate actually needs a little bit of work because this has not been through a any adjustments in post. This was actually filmed on a Sony FS7 in, I think, their Cine Gamma. So the gamma of this really needs a bit of processing. So we might kind of approximate that. Not ideal, but we have that, and we also have here, I believe, this is our shadow pass. It's just black shadow on black background, but hopefully if we go in and have a look at our alpha channel here, hopefully this is going to, yep, that's going to have some shadow in it, so that's nice. Okay, so we've got that as our separate shadow. So I'm just going to just make sure I've only got one thing open up here. So there's our shadow, and this here is our lens distortion mode that we created in one of the other videos I've got there on how to create distort our footage in Nuke. So this has kind of got a bunch of stuff within it that basically is going to match the distortion of a real world lens, because obviously this here, our backplate, was shot with a real world lens. That will have had some distortion on it, and we need to match that. So let's just have a quick look and see what we've got there. I'm looking at the alpha at the moment, so let's come back. So let's maybe look at this beauty pass and just kind of see what we've got. Now you can see one thing here, the resolution is been rendered at the underdistort resolution out of Maya. So this is 3916 by 2203. So original should be 3840 by 2160. Yep. So hopefully this is going to produce UHD 4K output. So if I just hook that up to there and I look at that in my viewer, you can instantly see it's slightly different. So perfectly, yeah, this is UHD 4K, which is great. And if we actually just take a look at the wipe here, so if I connect this here and I connect to my original, and we kind of just move over here, we can see that this lens, okay, it's not staggering amount of distortion that we've got here in the shot, but it's sufficient that we would want to compensate for that. So we can see that the two images do look slightly different. And of course things are going to be in slightly different positions if we're dealing with underdistort versus distort. Yep. So so you can see predictably near the center of the image we're perhaps experiencing a bit less distortion, but as we get further and further out we're seeing a kind of more and more distortion. So that's great. So we're happy that that is kind of working. Just disconnect that there. So we've got a couple of choices here as to how we go about doing this distort, and how we deal indeed with these multi-channel XRs to begin with. Yeah, we can either kind of copy them into this pipe like a multi-channel XR, or we can start building this beauty pass separately. Now, here, Z-depths, I've got a diffuse. Okay, so ideally we'd want, in V-Ray, we would want this diffuse really to be a lighting pass rather than a diffuse pass. But I'll go through the basic workflow anyway. So from V-Ray I'd really want a lighting as my base element, and then probably a reflect, refract, specular, and then velocity and Z-depth may be optional. What you would normally do is check basically with your multiple render passes that you can rebuild your beauty pass. Now that might at first glance seem completely pointless, but of course the idea is that you can manipulate your separate render elements. So let's just look at kind of building a little tree here. So what you would usually do is you would start with your lighting pass. I'm going to start with my diffuse pass because it's the nearest I've got to my lighting pass right here. And you would then kind of merge in your other passes. So you create a merge node, and the basis of your pipe, always the background, is your B connection. And then most of the others, it doesn't really matter too much which order they're coming in. So I'm just going to collect my refract element onto here. Yep. So if I look at my merge node now, what I'm actually seeing is not very useful because my merge node is doing its default over operation. It's taking this and putting it over using the alpha channel of this. And if I look at the alpha of that, the alpha is that, so it's basically taking exactly where the car is and making all of that completely opaque and stuffing it over that. So basically it's hiding the diffuse layer behind this new refract layer, which is completely pointless. So what you usually want to do is change the merge node operation. Now it depends on the render element you want to use. Almost all of them are standard arithmetic. You're either going to be multiplying, dividing, adding, occasionally subtracting, but most of these render passes are just going to work in a plus. And just think of it in terms of, basic arithmetic. When you add these two together, what Nuke is actually doing is on a pixel by pixel basis in the image performing that simple arithmetic. So think to yourself, when I'm adding these two images together, do I want the final image to be brighter than it is now? In which case obviously I'm probably going to be using a plus or a multiply. Do I want it to be darker? In which case I'm probably using a divide or subtract. And then also think, do I really want to be doing a multiply? Because if we think in Nuke, all of these values are normalized to, on the whole, between 0 and 1, 0 being black and 1 being white. So if we think of taking these two images and we multiply, anywhere where we've got black is going to be black in the final image. Now, that isn't always the case, because if I think of where this car is, that's red. If I look at this refract image here instead, that's black most of that. So if I do a multiply, that's going to take whatever these red values are, multiply them by 0. So they're going to end up black. That's definitely not what I want to do. So, but I do want it to be brighter. So multiply is not going to be no good. So it's probably going to be a plus. Right? So if I look, just change that merge to a plus, and hey presto, it's added on my refraction. So there we go. We've added in our kind of glass to our car. So it's already looking a little better. Yep. Now let's have another merge, and again let's put that background pipe in. So I'm working from top to bottom here, and let's maybe take our reflect. Now reflect is, actually no, I'll take the specular because it's a bit more subtle. I'm going to put that in there. Okay, and again I'm going to want that to be a plus. Yep. So when I look at that one, okay, the tyres now looking a lot better. We've got that, looking much nicer than previously. And obviously let's now take our reflect, maybe zoom out a little bit, perhaps touch too much. Take our reflect and take another merge. I could copy and paste my merge nodes, but hey ho. And let's also change that one to a plus. So my reflect obviously is pretty dramatic, so that's going to change how this looks a lot when we kind of merge this in. And predictably we now look like that. Right? Now this of course looks a lot better than it did, but I'm only starting with my base diffuse pass here rather than my lighting path. So that doesn't match that. Right? Because my lighting path would have been darker. Yep. So the idea is that you want to render out these render elements so that you can rebuild your beauty paths. Right? But for the moment, I'm just going to assume that this was a kind of lighting path that I had here. Now, of course, the basic aim with that is not just to kind of build these things together and end up with what we already had as a beauty path anyway, but to be able to do some color correction on these things. So we would probably Nuke's color correction node, we've got a grade there, so I might just kind of whack some grade nodes in. To get those, you can either just press G on the keyboard, or all of Nuke's color correctors are over here on this menu. So there's grade, there's the keyboard shortcut, or of course, like most things, just press Tab, start typing in the name of the node, and then pick it from the menu. Yeah, that works as well. So I've got a grade there, so another grade in here perhaps, and another grade in there. Yep, lovely. And maybe in for the diffuse as well. Right. Now, the main point of all of these, of course, is to enable you to color correct each of these elements separately. So if I take this grade here, and I just take this multiply, I'm kind of just lowering the reflect input to this final image. So I can correct that, or boost it, of course, make it a more reflective element. Yeah. Or I could maybe do a gamma shift, but I'm just doing a gamma shift on the reflections with this, not with anything else. Yep. The same with my specular. I could kind of take this grade here, and this is going to be mainly affecting the specular, which is mainly on the tires. So I can kind of make that increase, and it's not really affecting much of the rest of my image. So this kind of multi-render element, multi-pass AOV style of kind of assembling 3D elements is pretty common for compositing, and it enables it to adjust it to match your backplate. You know, if your lighting doesn't look quite right, maybe it's a bit too specular highlights, you can tone them down a little bit. And of course, you don't just have to color correct them here. You might decide, well, what I actually want is I want my reflections, but maybe my reflections need to be a little bit softer, so maybe I blur my reflections a little bit or something like that, rather than just apply a grade. Now, strictly speaking, doing this color correction with CG images can be a bit dicey if these images have an alpha, which they do. So what's pretty common is to actually, before you color correct a render element, is to add in an unpre-multiply node. So before we do any color correction, we unpre-multiply these things here. Yeah. The most obvious thing that you'll probably sometimes see with this is kind of like colored fringes around a CG element that you've color corrected. To be honest, it can depend on the alpha channel in the image. You might be very lucky and get away with it and find that, you know, for your particular image you've seen it works okay. But probably good practice to unpre-multiply these. What that basically does is it sort of turns off your alpha channel, is a way of thinking about it in terms of the way that it works, and then you color correct it, and then obviously later on we are going to have to pre-multiply it to turn back on, if you want to think of it in those terms, our alpha channel. So that's going to be pretty important. Now, at the moment we've got this merge node here. So we've put things together. Now it's not looking quite right because we're missing a lighting pass, but hey ho, we've got the rough kind of element here. Now we might kind of choose to create a backdrop here. I suggest when you're creating your Nuke scenes, you do organize them in backdrops. So we might kind of put that up there, maybe put that behind there. And then we might move these just over a touch or something like that, and maybe down there a little bit. Lovely. And this can now enable me to move this whole group at once, and it's just easily visually identifiable. So if I just double click on my backdrop here, you can type in a label. Let's call this assemble render elements. And maybe make that a little bit bigger text so I can see it in there. So I've now got that nicely. So what I might do is, let's just kind of do a very crude version of this composite perhaps initially. So I've kind of assembled my render elements. Now let's take my my background here, and let's do a quick, kind of very quick slap composite. Yep. Now I'm going to add in a bit of a grade on this one, and I'm just going to do a bit of gamma correction. Because this one was probably a little bit more like this than this kind of washed out kind of thing that I'm getting here. So right, so if I just do a merge right now, this is going to look super fake, but I'm not too worried about that. I'm just kind of showing the process here. So if I take my B connect that to my graded background, and I take my A and I connect that to my final merge node here. Yep, just move that down there. If you hold down the command key on the PC, control key probably on the PC, or command key on the Mac, you can make these little dot nodes just by dragging these little diamonds. They don't do anything except just make your Nuke nodes, Nuke node graph a bit easier to kind of arrange. So, if I look at this merge, you know, slap, there we are, super big cars in the scene. It's got this kind of working at least at some element. Yep, we have our back plate. Now, we haven't distorted our CG, so what we probably ought to do down here is add in a pre-multiply node just down here, because we unpre-multiplied all these elements. So that's going to just ensure that we correctly pre-multiply. And what I'm also going to do is add in this distortion node. So here's our lens distort. We haven't distorted any of this CG, so I'm just going to paste that in. Put that in before the merge. So then that's looking good. So you can see there, it doesn't really look on the ground. It's distorted. Okay, this is starting to come to the right position here. That's better. Okay. So right. So I've got a couple of little bits working here. Now we've also got some other bits and pieces. We've got a shadow. Now our shadow is basically a black element with an alpha. It's nice. So what we should do is blend that in. Now obviously with our shadow here, most obvious is to merge that back to the background. So we could just kind of merge node here and add in, and hey presto, now have a background with a shadow on it. So look at that. See what's my shadow my car. Just disable the shadow coming in. So we've got our round shadow shot. Now to be honest, this is what I'm doing is merging in here. On the whole, I don't really like quite much as an alternative approach, which is like delete. Preferably to grade in. And grade node on the one here, a little mask connector next to the little arrow. Just drag that to my read node. Actually, sorry, I just decided to my grade node, if I color it, you can see that I'm color thing. So I just take this multiplier and pull it down. If I look at the grade node, it's just making the whole image darker or of course brighter if I increase it, and default value of 1. Now, if I do let's say I lower this to 0.1, yep, pretty dark. That's affecting the whole image, but if I take my grade, of course this shadow has an alpha channel, so if I just drag that mask connector onto there, it's now colour correcting where that alpha is, so it's kind of pulling down that, and it gives you a bit more control more easily, so we can kind of increase it, so for a lighter shadow, or we can make that a darker shadow, yeah, nice, and of course if we really wanted to tint our shadow a little bit, we've got a little bit of control here with our colour controls, so we can kind of play around with things a little bit there as well. So for the moment I'm going to make it kind of all the way down to 0, so I've got a really dark shadow, but we can tweak it. Okay, so we've brought our shadow in. So I might kind of create another backdrop over here. So there we are, and let's just pull that around there for the moment. Let's kind of assemble back plate and shadow, something like that. Again, give it a nice big font, maybe slightly smaller. There we go, and I'll maybe make this back plate a different colour, just for variety. Yeah. Obviously with your own Nuke comps, you might choose to have a sort of colour-coded standard way you work. You know, you make your green screen shots green. You might make your your rotos a different shade, whatever. I imagine that's pretty common that you'd kind of do that. So, okay, so here we're just part one. Then so we've kind of assembled this. So this is our background in going in now. So here obviously we've got our car and we've got our shadow, and we can just sort of see there's our shadow kind of there. Yeah. Now, of course, there's one thing we kind of haven't done yet, and that is that we haven't distorted our shadow, because our shadow is another CG element that's come from Maya. This is originally distorted, so the back plate itself is fine, the grades are fine, but we really should distort this CG. So what I'm going to do is take this lens distort node here and just copy and paste it. And I'm just going to paste it, deselect and paste it in, and just pop it between my shadow and my grade. Yep. So that it's then going to distort my shadow before it goes into the grade. And you can just see that the shadow actually moves into the right place when it's distorted. So there it is. I haven't really got much of a shadow from this tyre here at the front, but I add that in, and hey presto, my shadow is now in the right place. Okay, fabulous. So, you know, at some level there's a lot more work to do with this, and for the next one I'll put in the lighting pass here. But this is, you know, the real basics. You would have your kind of render elements here, you would have your kind of distort here, you'd have your unpremults, premults, maybe your grades. I haven't really adjusted those much yet. You'd have your merge node, you'd have your shadow element here that you've distorted to match the rest of the footage. I haven't yet used velocity or z-depth or anything like that. Last thing I'll probably just show here is outputting this. So this is kind of the real basics. So I would have a write node on here, and you can have as many write nodes in a project as you like. So if you wanted to output your intermediate steps, you know, maybe I just want to kind of show the shadow on the background. I might just want to kind of show that kind of for a VFX breakdown or something like that. Or I might just want to show the various different render elements coming in. I might want to show there it is, and there's this one coming in, and this one's coming in. Again, I might want that for a VFX breakdown. I may even want my distort, whatever. Yep, so a bunch of stuff we might want. So you might have write nodes attached to various places around your scene. But for here, this is just like a final write node. Now, write nodes in Nuke, obviously you have to choose what you want to output. So by default, it's just going to output your red, green, and blue channels and nothing else. Sometimes you're going to want your alpha channel, so just watch that. If you want to composite this outputted image with anything else, you're going to want the RGBA. You're obviously going to want to choose where to put it, so you always kind of choose where to put this. So I'm going to set an output location. Now I would probably, if this was in, I would go into my, you know, sort of pipeline folder. I'd go into comp, I'd go into renders, and I might create a subfolder in there for okay, and I'm just going to create a test render there, and I would obviously give this a name. So I would kind of call this, you know, whatever my project was, RC car, my scene number, my shot number, the kind of output this is. I kind of might call this final, let's say, out of my initials. And then with Nuke, you need to give it some frame padding, so you have to kind of have a hash character for each. There we go. I've got a UK keyboard on this one. You need one hash character for each frame number in your frame name. Didn't really say that very well. So if I had 4 hash characters here, my first frame would be 0001, 4 digits, If I wanted it to be 001, I just have 3 hash characters. Yeah, and then optionally, but you might as well have a dot and then a file extension for the kind of file you want. Now we may want something like a DPX or something like that as our final output here. Usually you're going to want this to be a reasonably high quality still image format. Certainly if you're going to render this on a render farm, you wouldn't want to render this to a QuickTime movie. And you probably wouldn't want to render this to a low quality JPEG. With all the work that you've probably done up to this stage with your work, you're probably going to want to render it at least into a high quality format. That could be a sort of an uncompressed TIFF, it could be a Targa or something like that. But you know, DPX is a very high quality format too that would be quite suitable for this. So once you choose the file extension, Nuke defaults to all the typical file type options. You can choose to make some of those. I'm going to leave those on defaults. Then you have the option to render just a bunch of frames. So you could just render a few frames. So in my case, I might render 1290 to 1300. Yep, just 10 frames. Yep, there's 1300 frames here, so it would take a while to kind of render out. And then to render your write nodes, if you just got one, you can obviously select it and render. If you had a bunch of them in your node graph, you could render all of them simultaneously, providing you'd set their output locations. Or again, providing you've set them, you could just select 2 or 3 of them and render just the nodes you've selected. Right? Okay, so I'm just going to render that out, and I'm just going to make sure that I render it to the frame range that I've requested there. So my custom frame range, I'll just set it to 1290 to 1300 there, and just say OK. And then it's just going to step through that. It's going to do a bit of calculation. To be honest, there's very little that's going to take Nuke much time in this particular node graph here. There's just some simple merge nodes, a few color correctors. Once you get into doing things like motion blur and things like that, you can expect this to start taking a little bit longer, especially if like this and you're working at 4K. Okay, so I'm just going to leave these things to render here, but I'll finish up for now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a part 2 to this, where I kind of bring in a lighting pass and get this looking a little bit more realistic, and then we'll start looking at adding perhaps things like a bit of motion blur, maybe a bit of light wrap, doing a little bit of refinement to what we've got here, and maybe look at outputting some things for a VFX breakdown as well. Okay, so thanks for watching. Hope that's been useful to you. Okay, so bye for now.